the nocturnal meeting. On gaining the head of the staircase leading to the corridor, Mistress Nutter, whose movements had hitherto been extremely rapid, paused with her daughter to listen to the sounds arising from below. Suddenly was heard a loud cry, and the music, which had waxed fast and furious in order to keep pace with frenzied boundings of the squire, ceased at once, showing some interruption had occurred, while from the confused noise that ensued, it was evident the sudden stoppage had been the result of accident. With blanched cheek, Alison listened, scarcely daring to look at her mother, whose expression of countenance, revealed by the lamp she held in her hand, almost frightened her. Then it was a great relief to hear the voices and laughter of the serving men as they came forward with Nicholas and bore him towards an apartment. And though much shocked, she was glad when one of them, who appeared to be Nicholas's own servant, assured others that it was only a drunken fit, and that the squire would wake up next morning as if nothing had happened. Apparently satisfied with this explanation, Mistress Nutter moved on, but a new feeling of uneasiness came over Alison as she followed her down the long dusty corridor in the direction of the mysterious chamber where they were to pass the night. The abbot's room was allocated to Dorothy Ashton, and from its sombre magnificence, as well as the ghostly tales connected with it, had impressed her with so much superstitious misgiving that she besought Alison to share her couch with her, but the young girl did not dare to assent. Just however, as Mistress Nutter was about to enter her own room, Dorothy appeared on the corridor and calling to Alison to stay a moment, flew quickly towards her and renewed the proposition. Alison looked at her mother, but the latter decidedly and somewhat sternly negatived it. The young girls then said goodnight, kissing each other affectionately, after which Alison entered the room with Mistress Nutter and the door was closed. 2 tapers were burned on the dressing table, and their light fell upon the carved figures of the wardrobe, which still exercised the same weird influence over her. Mistress Nutter neither seemed disposed to retire to rest immediately, nor willing to talk, but sat down and was soon lost in thought. After a while, an impulse of curiosity which she could not resist prompted Alison to peep into the closet, and pushing aside the tapestry partly drawn over the entrance, she held the lamp forward so as to throw its light into the little chamber. A mere glance was all she was allowed, but it sufficed to show her the large old chest through the monkish robes suspended above it, and which had partially attracted her attention, was gone. Mistress Nutter had noticed the movement, and instantly and somewhat sharply recalled her. As Alison obeyed, a slight tap was heard at the door. The young girl turned pale, for in her present frame of mind any little matter affected her. Nor were her apprehensions materially allayed by the entrance of Dorothy, who, looking white as she said, she did not dare to remain in her own room, having been terribly frightened by seeing a monkish figure in mouldering white garments exactly resembling one of the carved images on the wardrobe issue from behind the hanging on the wall. They glided into the oratory, and she entreated Mistress Nutter to let Alison go back with her. The request was peremptorily refused, and the lady, ridiculing Dorothy for her fears, bade her return, but she still lingered. This relation filled Alison with inexpressible alarm, for though she did not dare allude to the disappearance of the monkish gown, she could not help connecting the circumstance with the ghostly figure seen by Dorothy. Unable otherwise to get rid of the terrified intruder, whose presence was an evident restraint to her, Mistress Nutter at length consented to accompany her to her room, and convince her of the folly of her fears by an examination of the oratory. Alison went with them, her mother not choosing to leave her behind, and indeed she herself was most anxious to go. The abbot's chamber was large and gloomy, nearly twice the size of the room occupied by Mistress Nutter, but resembling it in many respects, as well as in the dusky hue of its hangings and furniture, most of which had been undisturbed since the days of Haslew. The very bed of carved oak was that in which he had slept, and his arms were still displayed upon it and on the painted glass of the windows. As Alison entered, she looked round with apprehension, but not being encouraged just by her uneasiness. Having raised her arrows from behind which Dorothy averred the figure at issue, and discovering nothing but a panel of oak with a smile of incredulity, Mistress Nutter walked boldly towards the oratory, the 2 girls hand in hand following trembling after her, but no fearful object met their view. The dressing table with a large mirror upon it occupied the spot where the altar formerly stood, but in spite of this and of other furniture, the little place of prayer, as has previously been observed, retained much of its original character, and seemed more calculated to inspire sentiments of devotional awe than any other. After remaining for a short time in the oratory, during which she pointed out the impossibility of anyone being concealed there, Mistress Nutter assured Dorothy she might rest quite easy, that nothing further would occur to alarm her, and recommending her to lose the sense of her fears as speedily as she could in sleep, took her departure with Alison. But the recommendation was of little avail. The poor girl's heart died within her, and all her former terrors returned, and with additional 4. Sitting down, she looked fixedly at the hanging till her eyes ached, and then covering her face with her hands and scarcely daring to breathe, she listened intently for the slightest sound. A rustle would have made her scream, but all was still as death, so profoundly quiet that the very hush and silence became a new cause of disquietude and longing for some cheerful sound to break it. She would have spoken aloud, but from a fear of hearing her own voice. A book lay before her, and she essayed to read it, but in vain. She was ever glancing fearfully round, ever listening intently. This state could not endure ever. Feeling a drowsiness steal over her, she yielded to it, and at length dropped asleep in her chair. Her dreams, however, were influenced by her mental condition, and slumber was no refuge, as promised by Mistress from the haunting terror. Alas, a jarring sound aroused her, and she found she had been awakened by the clock striking 12. Her lamp required trimming and burned dimly. By its imperfect light, she saw the arras move. This could be no fancy, for the next moment the hangings were raised, and a figure looked from behind them, and this time it was not a monk but a female robed in white. A glimpse of the figure was all Dorical, for it instantly retreated, and the tapestry fell back to its place against the wall. Scared by the apparition, Dorothy rushed out of the room so hurriedly that she got to take her lamp and made her way, she scarcely knew how, to the adjoining chamber. She did not tap at the door, but trying it and finding it fastened, opened it softly and closed it after her. Resolved, if the occupants of the room were asleep, not to disturb them, but to pass the night in the chair. The presence of some living being beside her sufficing in some degree to dispel her terrors. The room was buried in darkness, the tapers being extinguished. Advancing on tiptoe, she soon discovered a seat, when what was her surprise to find Alison asleep within it. She was sure it was Alison, for she had touched her hair and face, and she felt surprised that the contact had not awakened her. Still more surprised did she feel that the young girl had not retired to rest. Again she stepped forward in search of another chair, when a gleam of light suddenly shot from one side of the bed, and the tapestry masking the entrance to the closet was slowly drawn aside from behind it. The next moment appeared the same female robed in white that she had previously beheld in the abbot's chamber. The figure held a lamp in one hand and a small box in the other, and to her unspeakable horror disclosed the livid and contorted countenance of Mrs. Nutter. Dreadful though undefined suspicions crossed her mind, and she feared if discovered she would be sacrificed to the fury of this strange, terrible woman. Luckily, where she stood or Mistress Nutter was revealed to her. She herself was seen from view by the hangings of the bed, and looking around for a hiding place, she observed that the mysterious wardrobe close behind her was open, and without a moment's hesitation she slid into the covert and drew the door to noiselessly. But her curiosity overmastered her fear, and firmly believing some magical rite was about to be formed, she sought in mean to behold it. Nor was she long in discovering a small islet wall and carving which commanded the room, unconscious of any other presence than that Alison, whose super appeared to occasion her no uneasiness. Mistress Nutter placed a lamp on the table, made fast the door, and muttering some unintelligible words, unlocked the box. It contained two singularly shaped glass vessels, the one filled with bright sparkling liquid, and the other with a greenish coloured unguent. Pouring forth a few drops of the liquid into a glass near her, Mistress Nutter swallowed them, and then taking some of the unguent upon her hand, proceeded to anoint her face and neck with it, exclaiming as she did no Amen Hetan, Amen Hetan, words that fixed themselves upon the listener's memory. Wondering what would follow, Dorothy gazed on, when she suddenly lost sight of Mistress Nutter, and after looking for her as far as her range of vision, limited by the aperture, would extend, she became convinced that she had left the room. All remaining quiet, she ventured after a while to quit her hiding place, and flying to Alison tried to awaken her, but in vain. The poor girl retained the same moveless attitude and appeared plunged in the deathly sleep. Much frightened, Dorothy resolved to alarm the house, but some fears of Mistress Nutter restrained her, and she crept towards the door on the positive to see whether that red lady was there. All was further still, somewhat emboldened. She returned to the table where the box was left open, and the contents of the garden attracted her attention. What was the liquid in the vial? What would it do? These were questions she asked herself, and longing to try the effect, she ventured at last for 4 drops to taste it. It was like a force of distillation, and she became instantly sensible of a strange, bewildering excitement. Presently her brain reeled, and she laughed wildly. Never before had she felt so light, buoyant, and wings seemed scarcely wanted to enable her to fly. An idea recurred to her. The wondrous liquid might arouse Alison. The experiment she tried at once. Dipping her finger in the vial, she touched the sleeper side each and opened her eyes. Another drop, and Alison on her, gazing at her in astonishment and laughing wildly as herself. Poor girl, how wild and strange they look, how unlike herself. Whither are you going? Cried Alison. To the moon, to the stars, anywhere, young Dorothy, with a laugh answered. I will go with you, cried Alison, echoing the laugh. Here and there, exclaimed Dorothy. Amen, amen. As the mystic words were they started away, it seemed as if no one could keep saw how they crossed the closet, passed through the sliding panel into the abbey, entered the oratory, only sent by the secret staircase. God, they did not stay. They were gliding swiftly along the moonlight like winged spirits. Watching them towards the conventual church, they could not see if they were drawn thither as if she was irresistibly dragged toward them, or someone rock scribe in the eastern leg. Nothing surprised them then, or they might have been struck by the dense vapour enveloping the monastic ruins and shrouding them from view. Nor was it until they entered the desecrated fabric that any consciousness of what was passing around returned to them. Their ears were then assailed by a wild bubble of discordant sounds, reaching the croakings as of owls and ravens, shrieks and jarring cries as of night birds bellowing as the cattle roared, and dismal sounds of unearthly laughter, divine and extraordinary shapes as of men or women, beings of this world or of another, they could not tell. Though they drew them, the latter flew past with wild whoops and piercing cries, flapping the air as if great leathern bat-like wings, or bestriding black monstrous misshapen steeds. Fantastical and grotesque were these objects, yet hideous and appalling now and then. A red and fiery star whizzed crackling through the air and then exploding, break into numerous pale phosphoric lights that danced a while overhead and then flittered away among the ruins. The ground seemed to heave and tremble beneath footsteps as if the graves were opening to give all their dead, while toads and hissing reptiles crept forth. Appalled yet partly restored to herself by this confused and horrible din, Alison stood still and kept fast hold of Dorothea, who, seeming under a stronger influence than herself, was drawn towards the eastern end of the fane, where a fire appeared blazing, strong ruddy glare being cast upon the roof quiet, and the mouldering arches surrounding. The noises around them suddenly ceased, and all the uproar seemed concentrated in the spot where the fire burned. Dorothy besought her friend so earnestly to let her see what was going forward that Alison reluctantly and tremblingly assented, and then moved slowly towards her transept, taking care to keep under the shelter of the column. On reaching the last pillar behind which there remained an extraordinary and fearful spectacle burst on them as they had fallen. A large fire was burning in the square, the smoke which ascending in eddying wreaths formed a dark canopy all there, where it was mixed with the steam issuing from a large black bubbling cauldron set on blazing embers. Around the fire were ranged in a wide circle an assemblage of men and women, chiefly the latter. Of these almost all old idiots of malignant aspect, their grim and sinister features with ghastly and lurid light. Above them, amid the smoke and steaming wheel, bat and glitter mouse, or owl and sea owl in many circles of weird assemblage chatted together in some wild jargon, mumbling and muttering spells and incantation, chanting fearfully in hoarse, cracked voices in wild chorus, and on breaking into a loud and more continued peal of laughter. Then there was more mumbling, chattering and singing, and one of the troopers used a wobbling, toppling forward. She was fearful, old, in fact, she was clear-eyed, bearded, whole, huge, out to be swift, glamour, as she casted the ingredients one by one. She chanted thus: head of monkey, brain of cat, eye of weasel, tail of rat, juice of mugwort, mastic, myrrh, all within the pot. I said, well, son, mother, no heels, cried a little old man whose doublet and oars were rusty black with short cloak of the same hue over his shoulders. Well, son, more heels, cried, advancing as the old witch retired amidst a roar of laughter from the others, and chanting as he filled the cauldron: here is formed from a mad dog's lips, gathered beneath the moon's eclipse, ashes of a shroud consumed, and with deadly vapour fumed. Those within the mess I cast, stir the cauldron, stirring flat a red head, which then took his place, singing: here are snakes from out the river, bones all torn, and sea calf's liver, swine's flesh fattened on a brood, wolves two, hares, foot, weasels, blood full of ape and fierce baboon, and panther spotted like the moon, feathers of the horned owl, dove pie and other fatal owl, fruit from fig tree never sown, seed from cypress never grown, all within the mess I cast, stir the cauldron, stirring fast. Nance Redfern then advanced, and taking from her wallet a small clay image tricked out in attire intended to resemble that of James Device, plunged several pins deeply into his breast, singing as she did so thus: in his likeness it is moulded, in his vestments it is enfolded, you may know it as I show it, in his breast sharp pins I stick, and I drive them to the quick. They are in, and the wretched hangs begin. Now his heart feels the smart through his marrow, sharp as arrow, torrents quiver, he shall shiver, he shall burn, he shall toss, and he shall turn unavailingly. Archers shall rash, cramps attack him, he shall veil, strength shall fail, till he die miserably. As Nancy tired and grew, we advanced and strangled over mountain, over valley, over wood and over way. On our gallantry, we riding, we hungry, frantic pace, and the reason of our coming, I knew what well, see through this night as we which while Lancashire Abbey. A wild burst of laughter followed the rest, and another whistle succeeded, and the feet of water, then these daughter, till the tempest gather over us, till the wonder strike wonder, and the lightning flash before us. Feet of water, then these daughter, really see our hall, and saw that as the words rose, a woman stepped from out the circle, going back the rain for the glory. And the Lord, this was speeches of Elizabeth Back, the presence in that evil assembly occasion. Christ, I was brought into the horror. A hail of water was next step order was, and bruising place in her hand. She stood in the British sprinkling a lot and a drink of spell. Mount water to the skies, bid of sudden storm arise, bid pitchy cloud advance, bid hawk lightning glance, bid angry thunder growl, bid a wild wind fiercely howl, bid a tempest good and main thunder lightning with me. I just concluded cloud gathered big overhead, obscuring the stars that had hitherto come down from bed. The wind a word within the layer of certain vapors, it seemed on condensed a black hole lightning over the air, and a loud peal of thunder overhead. Then the whole crew sang together, in the water, then he saw her, set the tempest gather over. Lightning flashes, thunder crashes, wild winds singing for a brief space the storm moved fearfully, and all the terror of that peace and far out of which she now began to think might have originated in a similar manner. The wind raved around the ruined pile, its breath was not felt within it, and the rain was heard descending in deluging showers without dawn. A drop came through the open roof. The thunder shook the walls and pillars of the old abbey, threatened to topple them down on their foundation, but they resisted the shock. The lightning played around the tall spires, swinging from his heart of fame, and ran down from his shattered summit to his base without doing any damage. The red walls struck round innocuously, though they fell at the very feet of the weird assembly, who laughed wildly at all tunnels, whilst the storm was at its worst, while the lightning was flashing fiercely and the thunder rattling loudly, which I thought was a shaping dish in her hand, advanced toward the fire and placing the pan upon it, threw certain roots and nerves into it, chanting, "Here is juice of hot brew, with black hell of all imbued. Here is mandrake leading through mixed with shades deadly, provided by the venom filled, taking the air of easy kill. Adders, skin and ravens together, with shell and equal blend together, dragons, war and barbers, hemlock, black and poisonous, bone hard and sore aspect, Latin, at midnight, in the hand together, and the baby turned by strong subjugation, by the forces blockade, spirits, I tell you here, all who live, my all here, after a moment for the swallow, white raw reverend of all, nightly page, or voices call, even now, and being right, added by the evil field, by the regular review, this night and fabric, and being right, and thou last and guilt by thy look of how moving dead art thou, I bidding, and thou fair one, disdain, bow thy heading, and thou hast gone, stay, and bidding, during this invitation, three of the assembly ceased, and they looked round in much expectation of results. Fully then did a long procession of monkey forms roving wide along the island, gathered around the altar. Grass covered thorns within the presbytery, the usual academic on the and under the morning grain stems was solid shape, we might turn on end across the earth, and with white light to see that is older. Then allowed for ivory sword, from the side that world the monkey form is only gone, majority is seen entering the oratory, and with its rebels at older, they waved it off menacingly. Another piercing shriek followed, and female shape, habited like none, and of surpassing loveliness, issued from the office chapel of the near the fire. Tenderly through of her power, mother chatted with her hand, but the long shadowy train glided off as they came close to the average and they stormed the Lord, and the shade of pastoral, and after the end of the danger, the storm had well nigh seized the whole howling and a blast of lightning and then the little wall. Weird moon and fair light was the war of the race, shattered water and falling into the window. Alice and Doubtless beheld the light. That little woman with the strange fashion wall wide by a raging storm waved with the characters on different blades and infernal fury in the wild world almost the living death on them and the red on the brow. That young woman black is heavily dressed in walking over their shoulders and majestic will sail on her living the mother no longer it is how in there and knew that he had assembled. Why did they so hate to and all prostrate or hissing their mother gone? Why did he stand proudly in the midst of them and extend their hand on the knife? For then was he their sovereign mistress, that day bent so slowly at her coming and rose so reverently at her bidding. Was this terrible woman now seated on a dilapidated tomb and guarding the dark conclave with the eye of a queen who held their lives in her hands? Was she her mother? Oh no, it could not be. It must be some find that usurped her likeness. Still though Alison does strove to discredit the evidences of her senses and to hold all she saw to be delusion of the work of darkness, she could not entirely convince herself, but imperfectly recalling the fearful visions she had witnessed during her former stupor, began to connect it with the scene now passing before her. The storm had already ceased and the stars again twinkled down through the shadow. Deep silence prevailed, broken only by the hissing and bubbling of the cauldron. Alison's gaze was riveted upon her mother, whose slightest gesture she watched. After numbering the assembly thrice, Mistress Nutter majestically arose and motioning Mother Chattox towards her, the old witch trembled into the advance and some words passed between them, the import of which did not reach the listener's ear. In conclusion, however, Mistress Nutter exclaimed aloud in accents of command, ordering it at once the sacrifice which we made. And on this Mother Chattox hobbled off one of the side chapels. A mortal terror seized Alison and she could scarcely draw breath. Dark tales had told her that baptized infants were sometimes sacrificed animals and their flesh boiled and devoured at their impious banquets, and ready lest some such atrocity was now allowed to be practiced. She mustered all her resolution, determined at any risk to fear and possible prevent its accomplishment. In another moment, Mother Chattox returned bearing something living wrapped in a white cloth which struggled feebly for liberation, apparently confirming Alison's suspicions, and she was about to rush forward when Mistress Nutter, snatching the bundle from the old witch, opened it and disclosed a beautiful bird with plumage white as stiff and snow, with legs were tied together so that it could not escape. Conjecturing what was to follow, Alison averted her eyes, and when she looked round again, the bird had been slain while Mother Chattox was in the act of holding its body into cauldron, muttering a charm as she did so. Mistress Nutter held her ensanguined knife aloft and casting some bloody drops upon the glowing embers, pronounced as a instant small following adjuration. Thy aid I see, infernal power, by thy words sent to Mount Tower, that the beldame all may know, where I will thou have her go, what I will thou have her do. An immediate response was made by an awful voice issuing apparently from bowels of the earth. Thou who seekest the England's aid, nor the brass sounds made. The Queen which rejoined, I do but grant the aid I crave, and that thou wishest thou shalt have another worshipper for thine to be when all is done. Again the deep voices fall with something of mockery in his accent. In no proud which I am content to mount the tower, the word is sent. All who were past the beldame goes, from where she points the stream with blows. The hind that he who wandered over the weary waste of Pendle shall wake at dawn and in surprise doubtless rain side that meets his eyes. The pathway leading to his foot winds differently, the gate is shut. The ruin on the right that still lies on the left. The night the wood had a fence with wall of stone, well stocked behind and mile have walked. The sheepfold and the herd had gone through channels new the river rushes, its ancient course concealed by bushes, where the hollow was mound rises from the upheaved ground, doubting, shouting with surprise. How the fool stares in his eyes, also changed the simple elf, fancies he is changed himself. Oh, 'tis a merry sight, the hag shall have enjoyed the light. But see, she halts the way with her hand, all is done as thou hast planned. After a moment pause, the voice added, I done as thou hast done, now be thy path straightforward. It shall be, replied sister, whose features gleamed with fierce exultation. Bring forth rose light, she shouted, and at the words her suavely serving command, black adder came forth from the lacy chapel, leading Janet by the hand. They were followed by Tib, who delayed the shoes twice, he formed the side, walked tail erect, and eyes flowing like carbuncle. At sight of her daughter, a loud cry of rage and astonishment burst from Alison's device, and rushing forward, she would have seized her if Tib had not kept her off by a formidable slayer teeth and talons. Janet made no effort to join her mother, but regarded her with a malicious and triumphant grin. This is my child, sweet Elizabeth. She cannot be baptized without my consent, and I refuse it. I do not want her to your wish, at least not yet a while. What made your ear your display? I were brought here, mother, replied Janet with affecting simplicity. Then get home at once and stop there, rejoined Elizabeth furiously. Nay, I snuggle all just yet, replied Janet. If vain be your wish as well as your laugh voice from below. Nah, I forbid it, shrieked Elizabeth. He shall not be baptized. Who hath brought her here, madam? She added to Mistress Nutter. Your hath stolen her from me, or I protest against it. Your consent is not required, replied Mistress Nutter, waving her off. Daughter is anxious to become a witch, that is not. She is not old enough to act for herself, said Elizabeth. Age matters not, replied Mistress Nutter. What must I do to become a witch? asked Janet. You must renounce all also heaven, replied Mistress Nutter, and devote yourself to Satan. You will then be baptized in his name and become one of his worshippers. You will have power to lift all persons' bodily ailments, destroy cattle, blight, corn, burn dwellings, and if you some beast or minded kill those you hate or who molest you. Do you desire to do all this? That I do, why don't I have more pleasure in evil than good, and rather see all than light. And if I had power, I was only sent to jeer at me, that they should rule to their dying day, and all this you shall be marked on his feet. Now for also salvation, then, and devote yourself, soul and body to the power of God. Elizabeth, who kept it as if shaped in her arm, passionate to raise and world aloud, but near Janet's answer, he is surprised. Alison was based on deep passes of his decided to use or there Janet cried, there and now, not all you do word or you are one forever. Sister Alison cried down staring at her inside. What makes you here? Do not ask for one cried Alison find later. Oh, what is this cried? Now about the consternation and astonishment into which informed by Alison unexpectedly. Why are you here? How have you brought the king slumber in which I found you? Why? Quiet one. The girl is past your help, cannot save her. She is already broken. Why? I am powerless to protect you here. That voice. You do not hear that laugh cried the high goal. Never about Janet cried Alison. My child, my sword, heart like throwing herself for her. No, not your danger. Oh, blah, blah. But Alison, not inflexible, you are all your own snare, magnified with his eyes, with something last. Saint Janet on the which Alison can't back her as well. Your consent is not quiet, and age matters not that her person about die, Marley fight for the ride. What can be done in this extreme? There's nothing bad voice. Janet is mine already, it is not brought hither by these or by her mother. She will come from her own God. I have watched her mark upon my own. Besides, she stays with the curse of Hassel clings to her. As the words were uttered, shade of the abbot glided forwards and chin the child on the brow with his finger back into a lamentable cry. Kneel, Janet, cried Alison, kneel and pray. And bend more overpower. Alison said, our past sword was in vain. I did even die or easier, and in place of it out on the child of the whoever is mine already. I am not good strive to without noise of mine will sprinkle water over her head and water. Alison was aimed thrown himself on a secret extremity of horror or overmastering him and held her last. Is there no way to avoid this time? No way but one fly voice. I have offered a new body. I'm going to do the performance side order or another. It has not done. I embrace the alternate tried to say, once you don't confidence instead of going, it shall be fine. Stretching her arm in the direction of Francis, holding a loud, imperial voice. Dorothy acted up to her. A minute elapsed, but no one appeared, and with a look disappointment, Mr. to repeat the gesture and the words, still no one came. Baffled, she is saying, what can you say is a maiden within the south, and said, you is not one of my servants, cried one for her. She cried, Mr. stretching her arm towards and said, this time I am answered, she added, as with a wild laugh. Dorothy obeyed the summons. I have anointed myself the punches and drank wash. Cried Dorothy with a wild gesture, wild laughter. Ha, this accounts for her presence here with Mrs. But it is not better she is. No food to offer resist Dorothy, thou shalt be a witch. A witch is slain for the bewildered maiden. Is Alison a witch? We are all witches here, replied Mrs. Hunter. Alison had no power to touch it. A merry company, exclaimed Dorothy, laughing loud. You will say so, and not replied Mrs. Hunter, and herself. See then not in the true of our veil, but again, behold, in place of the truth of all we go on, in wretched heavenly, replied Dorothy, I behold, a band of lovely, immensely loud, always in the fire, usually wild, and bold in natural, and always branches in their hands. See they rise, pebble, and strains of ravishing music with the ear. I never heard sound so sweet and serene as sound before, and seen how graceful and how lively. Ha, ha, Alison would not check her, did not undeceive her, for power of speech as a movie in the idol, but she comprehended the strange illusions under which the poor girl lay. The figures Dorothy described, I think the movie was still to her the same loathsome and abhorrent wishes. The ravishing music jarred discordantly on her ear as if used by a shrill cornet, and the lights and dance was a fantastic round of shouts and laughter by all over. Janet laughed immoderately and seemed delighted by the antics of truth. I never wished to dance before, cried, but I should like right now. Join them then, said Mrs. and the girls, given a delight, a place was made for her in the round, and taking hands with Mother Molefield and the red-haired witch, she took it as merrily as the rest. Who is she, the sunlight habit, cried Dora, pointing to the shade I saw dead, which still hovered near the weird assemblage. She seems more beautiful than all the others. Will she not dance with me? He did not, said Mr. Dorothy, however, would not be gainsaid. Despite the caution, beckoned the figure towards her. It came at once, and in another instant, its arms were enlaced around her. The same frenzy that had seized Nicholas now took possession of Dorothy, and her dance, I saw, might have come to a similar conclusion if it had not been checked by Mr. Waving her hand, announced the bell figure into the Dorothy answered while she was wet. How like these diversions, said Mr. She was panting and almost reckless. It is marvellous, like why Dorothy? Why have you scarred my heart in some way? Because she would have done you a mischief, replied Mr. But now let me question you. Are you willing to renounce your baptism and enter into covenant with Mr. Dark? Dorothy did not seem in the least to comprehend what was said to her. She nevertheless replied, I am bringing water and salt, said Mr. She thought, by these drops I baptize you, she added, giving her fingers and hair to sprinkle it over the brow of the proselyte. Then it was that Alice by almost reunion never burst the spell that bound her and clasped Dorothy in her arms. You know not what you do, dear Dorothy, cried. I answer to you, you will not yield to the snares and temptations of Satan, however subtly devised. You defy him and all his works. You will make no covenant with him, though surrounded by his bondslave, you fear him not. Is it not so? See, but Dorothy could only answer when he was saying, laugh. I will be over it. It's too late, interposed Mr. Simpson. I must say, remember, standing in your way, all you fall. I will never desert her, cried Alice, whining her arms around her. Dorothy, dear Dorothy, addressed herself to heaven, and angry growl against her. Beware, cried sister, I am not being discouraged against Alice. I'm not gaining victory over the soul and condition, and I shall expect her delivery. Heaven will aid Dorothy, allow her to roll under her, followed by a full flash of light, provoke not the vengeance of its darkness, said Mr. Simpson. I have no fear, replied Alice, cling to me, Dorothy, no harm shall befall you. Cried John. Let her go, cried Alice. You will do this history. Why should you fear the man progress in doing it yourself? I will say, what sin obstinate name, then I will no longer show. Forbearance, help me, sister, force me to it, and beware how you harm mankind. At these words, the three gathered round the girl. Alison only clasped her hands more tightly round Dorothy, while the latter, on brain the maddening conscience of words, laughed frantically at them. It was at this moment that Elizabeth Rice conceivable that the revenge for it is executed, while near Dorothy Sam spat on the ground and then cast a little mole over her, breathing in her ear. Thou art bewitched, she was by Alison Rice. Dorothy continued, so rear yourself, Master. Oh, do not you strive against me, dear Dorothy, cried Alison. Remain with me, or you are lost. Hence, off, set me free, shrieked Dorothy. Maybe I heard it is the man who will leave all yes, cried Alison. It is true that some girls will be together. Alison will be with you, and we believe, gave her off, away, cried Dorothy. Away, for Alison was still too strong, and in spite of her efforts and the duration she gave my patience was well nigh exhausted at the voice. Alison cried, switching her on the floor and leggings. Again the witches gathered furiously around the two girls. Kneel, Dorothy, kneel, whispered Alison, and forcing her down, she fell on her knees beside her, exclaiming with her hand, gracious heaven, deliver us. As the words were uttered, a evil cry was heard, and the theatre fled away, screaming like little horned birds. The cauldron sank into the ground, the density rose like a curtain, and the moon and stars shone brightly down upon the ruined pile. Alison prayed long and fervently, with clasped hands and closed eyes for deliverance from evil. When she looked round again, all was so calm, so pure, so holy in the rest that she was scarcely leaving the least to behold her others. Her hair and garments were damp with the dews of the night, and at her feet lay Dorothy. Sensible tried to raise her to revive her in vain, when at this moment footsteps were heard approaching, and the next moment Mistress Nutter, accompanied by Adam Whitworth and some other serving men, entered the choir. I see them, they are here, cried the lady, rushing forward. Heaven be praised, you have found them, madam, exclaimed the old steward, coming quickly after her. Oh, what an alarm you have given me, Alison, said Mistress Nutter. What could induce you to go secretly at night in this way with Dorothy? I dreamed you were here, and missing you when I awoke. Roused the house, came in search of you. What is the matter with Dorothy? She is frightened, I suppose. I will give her to read at this file, it will revive her. See, she opened her eyes. Dorothy looked round wildly for a moment, and then pointing her finger at Alice and said, she has your wish. Poor thing, she rambled, observing his sister to Adam Whitworth. The other servant men stared aghast at her accusation. She has been scared out of her senses by some fearful sight. Let her be conveyed quickly to my chamber, and I will see her cared for. The orders were obeyed. Dorothy was raised gently by the serving men, but she still kept pointing to Alison and repeatedly exclaimed, she has bewitched me. The serving men shook their heads and looked significantly at each other, while Mistress Nutter lingered to speak to her daughter. You look greatly disturbed, Alison, as if you had been visited by a nightmare in your sleep, and were still under its influence. Alison made no reply. A few hours tranquil sleep will restore you, assured Mistress Nutter, and you will get your fears. You must not indulge in these nocturnal rambles again, or they may be attended with dangerous consequences. I may not have a second warning to come to the house. And as Alison followed her along the garden path, she could not help asking herself, though with little hope in the question, if all she had witnessed was indeed nothing more than a troubled dream.